Forms are notoriously difficult to style in CSS. Obviously, you could style anything and everything within forms and the inputs, text areas, so on and so forth. But by default, they're pretty darn ugly, and they rely on browser specific or native browser styles, which in some browsers just don't look good. And in fact, in most browsers don't look very good. And forms are intended for people to log into an account, to make a purchase, to search for something, to write a blog post. Forms are everywhere and are used for a lot. And because they're so common, it's your job as a web designer and a web developer and a user experience designer to create forms that work beautifully. They don't get in the way of the user. They are enjoyable, dare I say. And it's important that you make sure to put the work in beforehand to make that happen. Now, you can do that with plain vanilla CSS. But you come across lots of different user case scenarios, like when there's an error, or maybe how can I make this login form a little bit more trim? How can I make it a little less clunky when I need someone to sign up for my web application? How can I make this look and feel just a little sexier? Now, that's where Bootstrap's built-in form styles are super, super useful. Now, before we jump in, I want you to create a new file called forms.html and copy over the content from index.html and just remove everything within the body tag. And then you'll be here. Change the title to Bootstrap Forms if you desire. And I have everything here. Nothing, nothing special here. Basically, everything I've added so far, I've just kind of pre-typed before this lecture was just this markup right here. And I'll run through that really quick for you. I have div with the class of container. That's a Bootstrap class, and that lets you center everything in the middle of the browser and then allows you to access the rows and the columns so that you can use your grid-based layout. Div with the class of page header, another Bootstrap class, which just gives a page header style. There's some padding, and then there is a thin gray border on the bottom just to separate the header from the content below. Level 1 heading, paragraph with the class of lead, which just increases the font size of the paragraph to make it seem like some leading text. And then down here, I have a div with the class of row. Again, Bootstrap class lets you establish a row so that you can access the columns. And right here, so far, I have a col small 6. So a small 6 column class, which basically, once I add a second one, which I will right here, and you should as well, paste, this will be 2 columns. So 6 and 6 equals 12, and that is obviously a 2-column layout. And in the middle here, I just have a couple of form tags just ready to go for us to just start and cut the crap and go straight to the goods. Okay, let's start off with a basic form example in Bootstrap. Now, you don't have to add any special classes yet to the form, but there are a lot of different elements and classes that are built into the form styles that allow you to make your Bootstrap forms nice. So let's start off by establishing what Bootstrap calls a form group. So div with the class of form group. Whoops. Now this basically means you're going to have a label and an input. You want those to be grouped together, and they just style them so that those have the proper margins and padding and so on and so forth. So form group always contains your label and your input, or your label and your text area. That's what you'd have in your form group. So let's start off with a label. And whoops, make sure you spell label correctly. And then I'll just add an input here, and then, okay, there we go. And then we'll just add our stuff here. So label, we're going to just say the first one here is going to be your name. And then the input will be type text. Now, if I were to leave this as is, you'll see some styling. So I'll show you in the browser. So you can see it already kind of has some basic styling. It doesn't look terrible, but it doesn't quite look right. And you can see here the page header and everything like that. It's all kind of, it already looks quite nice just to work with. Now, in here, the way that Bootstrap likes to work is associating the labels with the inputs. And the way you do that This gives the input an ID of whatever you wish. So I'm going to say form name, and then the for attribute in the label will be for name. And that means when you click the label, it will activate or focus on the input, and that's good usability. Now, the classes you're going to need to know. On the inputs, you always need to add class of form-control. And that's what Bootstrap calls inputs, form controls. And that just gives them the style. So let's save, check it out. There you go, form control. You can see it's bigger, it's full width, 100% of its parent, which is the 6-column or the 2-column layout. And it has this sexy kind of like blur or kind of active kind of effect when you click and focus it on the input, as you can see when I'm clicking here. And the styles on the inside, they look nice, it's nice padding, and it looks good. You got the label and the input. That's quite nice. Already, I'm into this form. And you should be too, so I don't feel weird. Now, I'm going to add another form group. So lucky enough, I just copy and paste. Nice and easy. Everything's easy from this point when you can just copy and paste your own work. And this will be email address. Now we just got to change the appropriate attributes and classes. So form email. Again, this isn't going to get any Bootstrap styles. This is just going to let you click on the label and activate, or more specifically, focus on the input when you click on the label. Good usability. Type, let's change this to email. The form, again, form control, good to go. Form group, you see how form groups work now? Save it, check it out. There you go. Boom, boom, looking pretty good so far. Now let's add another form group. And this one will say your message, and then we'll change the for to form message. And then instead of an input, this is going to be a text area. So text area, and we're going to add the class, again, of form control. And one more attribute, rows. And this just decides how many lines you want this text area to be in height. So let's just say 4. Now, if I save and check it out, there is our text area. Again, looking nice and styled. And again, you can resize this as you usually can. That's usually how that behaves in browsers. Now let's add another form group, but not specifically a form group. We're going to add a checkbox. And to add a checkbox, instead of adding the class of form group like this, you would just add div with the class of checkbox. And it behaves in the same way because it's not quite the same as a label and input. It's going to be a little bit different. You have to just start off with the input, with the type of checkbox, and then just some text right after. You don't even need a label on the outside here. But right here is where you should put the label, wrapping around the entire thing. Like so. So you have label, input, and checkbox within the label. Now if you save that and check it out, you have your checkbox. And when you click on the label or the entire thing, it checks the box rather than just trying to find this tiny target. Cool. Now let's add another group, but instead of checkbox, it's going to be div with the class of radio. And we're going to have a couple of radio buttons. Again, behaves in the same way as checkbox and form group. It's just more semantic and gives just a slightly different style. So you don't have to worry about hacking into your CSS and playing around with stuff. Input type radio. We're going to say radio button. Radio input rather. And this is going to have a name attribute, because radio inputs, you can click one or the other, not both. So you need to give it the same name. So form radio, we'll say number 2 and number 1. There we go. Now if I, I can't do this wrong. Copy this. Don't want to mess you up too much. There we go. This is the proper way of coding it. All right. Oh gosh. There. So label, input, and radio. Label, input, radio. So now if we check this out, we should have radio input 1, radio input 2. Now if you wanted them to not be side by side, and I'll just remove that border there, you could see. If you wanted them to not be side by side, you just give a break tag. Good enough. There you go. Now you got your radio inputs and your checkboxes. And then we'll do one last thing here. We'll do outside of this here, we'll just add a button. You don't need to add a form group or anything here. Type of submit. The class, these are Bootstrap classes, BTN, to give you the button styles. and add additional button styles like BTN default, primary, warning, success, info, or inverse. These are all different Bootstrap styles, and they'll be in the documentation under buttons, which we can cover later. But I'm just going to say button default for now. And I'll say submit, save. And there we have our default submit button, which is just nice, a nice style. And submit inputs, and buttons are hard and difficult and tedious to style in CSS, but Bootstrap's already done that for you. So I just built this form in 5 minutes and I'm talking. I could probably have made this in 30 seconds. And normally you'd have to do this and style it, and you'd probably be working on this crappy little, simple form. It'd take you 20 minutes, and that's a waste of time. So this is exactly why you'd want to use Bootstrap. So let's play around with some more forms here. I'm going to go to the other column, small 6, and I'm going to work on inline forms. Now, inline forms are like those simple forms, like in the header where you want to do a login form, which has 2 inputs side by side or multiple inputs side by side. I'll show you what that looks like. So first, you give the form the class of form-inline. That's a Bootstrap class. It lets it know, hey, I'm going to start working with an inline form here. Div, again, with the class of form group. This is a common convention that you're going to want to use regularly. And we're going to have our label and input. The label is going to have the for attribute, and we'll say login email, which means the ID for this one needs to be the same, login email. And then we're going to add the type of email here and class of form-control. So where Bootstrap makes up for when you have to, when you don't have to code the CSS, it makes up for it a little bit in having to add a lot of classes. And you'll see in Bootstrap markup, there's a lot of CSS classes kind of just thrown all over the place, which some developers don't really like, but others, think like, if I just have to type out 3 or 4 classes on one single line, that's better than me having to type 30 lines of CSS. So it's up to you. But this is a Bootstrap section, so we're going to be using the classes. So get over it. So save, and we're going to do another form group so you can know what this looks like so far. And then this one is going to be login password. So we're doing a little mini login form here. So we're going to change the for and the ID to the same values. Type will be password. That's not how you spell password. Form control, good to go. Save it, and let's see what we got so far. Side by side. Pretty cool. Okay. But I forgot to add text in here, so we should do that. Email and password. Save. There you go. You got email and password, but we don't have enough room in our 6 columns, as you could see, unless I make it larger. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to change these column sizes to, this one's going to be call small 8, and this one will be call small 4. To accommodate for those sizes. There you go. You can see how that works now. Now, another thing that you can do, because I don't really like how those labels look side by side, you can use a Bootstrap class for the labels called class SR-only, which stands for screen reader only, which basically hides labels from screen readers, but it's still there for usability. It's there for the markup. The screen readers know, hey, the labels are here. So on a screen reader, it will show the label is what I'm trying to say. And on other browsers, it won't show the label at all. Now, you're going to have to accommodate for that, because now watch this. If I just do screen reader only, it's going to remove those labels. Now you have no idea what you're supposed to be adding here, which is kind of terrible usability. So you could do something like placeholder and say email address, and then add another placeholder down here and say password. And then now you can see, oh, there you go, email and password. Good enough. I know how that works. And let's add one more form group here. Actually, I said earlier up here, when I didn't give this one a form group, I'm going to do the same, add a button without a form group. I'm going to say button danger. And let's see what happens. There we go. I guess we don't need it. I thought we were going to need to add another form group around this, but we don't. It sits there nicely right beside the form. So that is the the inline form. Now, there are a couple things that you could do which are called add-ons. Now, if you wanted to play around with something to make your forms a little bit more user-friendly, say in the example of right here, where you don't have a label and you just have a placeholder, well, you can add an extra little kind of bonus add-on to make that even more user-friendly. So what you do is you add a div and wrap it around the input here and tab that in and give this the class of input-group. So not form group, input group, meaning you're going to have a group of things that are associated with this specific input rather than a form group, which has a couple different elements within this form group, like a label and an input. This one is specifically just a couple things associated with this one input. Now in this case, we're going to be adding what's called an input group add-on. So div class of input dash group dash add-on. And let's just try something like the @ symbol. Save that. Let's see what happens. Do you see that? Let me just move that border. See how that works? Again, freaking brackets. Okay, there we go. You see that kind of has a little extra thing. You can't click it, but it's there just to let you know, hey, I mean, I could have used a different icon or something like that, but it's kind of how it works where you can have a little bit better of a usability kind of put in place here. It works in the same sort of deal if you were to say you wanted to put say you were logging into Twitter, and you could say something like this was Twitter handle. There you go. So that makes sense, like @BradHussey, password, log in, right? So that's kind of how that kind of works. That's the input group add-on. You can also add an input group add-on after an input, and it will automatically style to the other side. So let's do something like if this was like money, say dollar amount, and this will be .00. See how that works? So it keeps the user from having to type something like this when they could just go, because this is already kind of in there just for usability purposes. So yeah, that's how the add-ons work. Now there's another form that you can play around with. It's called the horizontal form. And I'm going to add another row here. So code this with me now. Div with the class of row. I'm going to add a little flag here just so I know. And in here, I'm going to have div with the class of call small. Let's go for 6. And in here, I'm going to add another form. Now, the way that you'd style your horizontal forms is you need to give it the class of form-horizontal. And then in here, again, we need to do the whole form group. And then in here, we'll add a label. And then before I do that, the reason the form horizontal, before I go any further, horizontal forms lets you use grids in the form inputs. So form group now acts as the row class, meaning you don't have to add row in here. And remember, you can use grids within grids. So you just have to make sure you add row and then your grids. If you want another set of grids within that row, you can keep doing row, grid, or row, column, so on and so forth. But in forms, if you add form group, as long as it's in the form horizontal, this acts as the row, and you don't need to add that class. So then the label would then give you the ability to say call small 3, and we'll say first name. And then now we need to add a div with the class of call small 9 to equal 12. And then I could say input type text class form-control. And let's just save, see what we have. So you can see here, well, let me give you some space. I'm going to put a couple break tags here and a horizontal rule just for some styling. Okay, here we go. You could see we have the label here and the form here. Now, the one thing I missed was to make sure that this label was right aligned. Now, built in, all you have to do is just add an additional class here that says control-label. Save, that will put it to right alignment and the proper line height. So now you have a horizontal form. And that's how you'd use the call small 3 and 9 to give you that sort of layout. You could change this again to 4 and 8 or however, what combination you wanted to use. And it looks like so. And in context, you would do something like this. I'm going to do another form group here, and I'm going to say last name, and same deal. There we go. First name, last name. So you have form that looks like this rather than a stacked form or a horizontal, inline form. You have a horizontal form where you have label and input on the same line. Another couple cool things you might want to know before we wrap up here are there's a couple extra classes you can add to your inputs to play around and give more meaning to your forms. So if you wanted to disable a form element, you just need to add the disabled attribute to any input. And because we're using HTML5, we just need to type something like that, disabled. And that will disable that element. And see how it automatically gives it a style there. So it's style, it's kind of grayed out, and the cursor turns into this kind of like no smoking icon sort of deal. So you can't click in there. You can also play with validation states. So all you need to do is give the form group an additional class of, say, well, let's work with the top one up here. Form group, given an additional class of has-success. And that will make it look, it's green. You might not be able to see it there, but this is actually green here. You can also give it the has warning class. That will turn it sort of an orangey yellow. And then has error. And that will turn it red. It's just more meaning. So if you have an error with your form, you can go ahead and add those classes on the fly, and it will just give more styles to your form without you having to do any additional CSS. And one last thing are how to size your inputs. If you want a smaller or larger input for whatever reason, you can do that. And so let me just show you with the bottom one down here. The input, we just need to give it the additional class of input-sm for input small. And you see how that's smaller than this one? It's just a little bit shorter with less padding. And you can also do input LG for input large. And that's a large input if you just want some more fat looking, sort of more full inputs. And so those are kind of the rundown of Bootstrap forms. The main things you'd want to use is we just kind of covered in this lecture, but obviously I suggest going to getbootstrap.com, heading to the CSS section and click on forms. That will take you to the forms, and you can go play around with the basic examples. You could see more examples and kind of more in-depth examples of certain things. You'll be able to see extra classes that we didn't talk about yet. And then you could just play around with their samples and just, test them out. So what I suggest doing is going now, checking out the documentation for the CSS forms in Bootstrap, and then head back to your file here and play around with some forms. Make some forms. Do a sign-up form. Do a purchase form. Do all those sorts of things and make a mess. Play around with the forms so you get more familiar because that's the best way you're going to learn is by practicing and actually getting your hands dirty. So have fun with that, and I'll see you in the next lecture. We're going to do some more Bootstrap.